Planner. He revoked your invite, but requested we keep your $50,000 funding. I replied, void every contract. Her, but ma'am, you're not the bride. Me, no, but I own this entire resort group. The morning it all started to unravel, I was standing in my custom kitchen, watching the espresso machine drip liquid gold into a porcelain cup. It was a Tuesday. The sunlight was catching the edge of the granite countertops, warming the space that I had entirely paid for, yet somehow felt like it belonged to a completely different version of myself. I am 42 years old, and for the last 15 years, I have been married to Harrison. Harrison is 45, carries himself with the unearned confidence of a man who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, and works in mid-level corporate management. He is handsome in that fading, comfortable way, and he likes things to be orderly. Specifically, he likes his life to be orderly, which means he prefers me to be quiet, accommodating, and mostly invisible when his family is around. You see, when Harrison and I met, I was a 27-year-old catering assistant. I spent my weekends carrying heavy trays of miniature crab cakes through crowded banquet halls, my feet aching so badly by midnight that I would cry in my beaten-up sedan on the drive home. Harrison's family, specifically his mother Camilla and his younger sister Bianca, never let me forget those origins. To them, I was the blue-collar girl who somehow tricked their precious boy into marrying down. What they did not know, and what Harrison actively chose to ignore, was that I never intended to stay a catering assistant. I watched, I learned, and I saved every single dime. Over the course of 15 years, while Harrison was complaining about office politics and stagnating in his career, I was quietly building an empire. I bought a failing catering company and turned it around. Then I bought a boutique hotel. Then an event planning agency. Before my 40th birthday, I was the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of a hospitality group that spanned across 4 states. My portfolio generated annual revenues that made Fortune 500 executives blink twice. Yet, if you asked Harrison what I did for a living, he would casually wave his hand, sip his scotch, and tell his friends, "Oh, Genevieve just helps out with some party planning stuff. It keeps her busy." It was a lie he told himself to protect his fragile ego. I let him tell it. I never corrected him at dinner parties. I never brought my financial statements to family gatherings to slap them down on the dining table. I thought I was being the bigger person. I thought that true power did not need to shout. I believed that by prioritizing family harmony over my own ego, I was building a solid foundation for my marriage. I paid the mortgage on our luxury home. I funded our vacations. I quietly topped up his checking account when he overspent on golf trips, and I allowed him to play the role of the primary provider. Looking back, I realized my silence was not noble. It was a breeding ground for disrespect. By allowing them to treat my massive, life-defining achievements as a cute little hobby, I taught them that I was a secondary character in my own life. I taught them that my resources were available for their consumption, but my presence was entirely optional. The seeds of their ultimate betrayal were planted exactly 1 month ago, at a family dinner hosted in our very own dining room. Harrison's younger brother, Julian, who is 32 and works as an architect, had just announced his engagement to Daphne. Daphne is 30 years old, incredibly photogenic, and possesses that specific brand of sweet, wide-eyed innocence that is usually a cover for intense calculation. The initial champagne toasts were joyful, but within 20 minutes, the conversation inevitably descended into the family's favorite topic, complaining about money. "We have toured 5 different venues," Daphne sighed, swirling her wine glass with perfectly manicured fingers. "Everything is just astronomically expensive. Julian works so hard, but with my student loans and the housing market, we are looking at having a backyard barbecue instead of a real wedding." Camilla, my mother-in-law, immediately placed her hand over her heart, her face contorting into an expression of theatrical agony. "Oh, absolutely not. Julian is a professional. He cannot host his clients and colleagues at a barbecue with paper plates. It would ruin his reputation." Bianca, the sister-in-law who had never held a job for more than 12 consecutive months, chimed in. It really is tragic how greedy the wedding industry has become. It makes it impossible for good, normal families to celebrate properly. I sat quietly at the end of the table, cutting my steak. I knew the exact profit margins of the wedding industry because I dictated them for the entire southwestern region. Camilla's eyes suddenly darted toward me, narrowing with that familiar, predatory glint. "Genevieve, darling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You work in that little catering world, don't you? Surely you know some people who could throw together a decent discount for family? Maybe some leftover dates or canceled bookings." Harrison chuckled, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin I had imported from Italy. "Mom, Genevieve just manages some spreadsheets for local vendors. She doesn't own the Bellagio." "I am just saying," Camilla huffed, adjusting her pearls. "Family should use whatever minor connections they have to help each other out. That is what family does." I watched the four of them, Camilla, Bianca, Harrison, and Julian, nodding in agreement. They were sitting in a house paid for by my company, eating food prepared by a private chef I employed, drinking wine from a cellar I curated, and casually dismissing my life's work while simultaneously demanding to benefit from it. Julian looked down at his plate, looking thoroughly miserable. Despite his family's toxic traits, I had always had a soft spot for Julian. He was generally kind to me over the years, often being the only one to remember my birthday or ask how my day was. He looked completely defeated by the financial reality of giving his future wife the day she wanted. "We will figure it out," Julian muttered. "Even if we have to take out a personal loan. I just want Daphne to be happy." For the next hour, they went back and forth, cutting corners. They discussed buying a second-hand dress, serving buffet-style pasta instead of a plated dinner, and cutting the guest list down to just immediate family. The desperation in the room was palpable. And sitting there, doing the mental math, I realized something. I could solve this entire problem with a single signature. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and Harrison had retreated to his study to watch sports, I found Bianca lingering in the kitchen. She was the self-appointed wedding coordinator for Julian and Daphne, holding a yellow notepad filled with crossed-out venues and budget deficits. "It is a disaster," Bianca whispered dramatically, leaning against the marble island. Daphne was crying in the guest bathroom. "They are $50,000 short of their absolute bare minimum dream wedding." $50,000. To the average person, it is a life-altering sum. To my hospitality group, it was a rounding error on a slow Tuesday afternoon. I made a decision right then and there. I did not make it to buy their love, and I certainly did not make it to show off. I made it because, despite the disrespect, they were my family. I had spent 15 years trying to fit into this unit, and I genuinely wanted Julian to have a beautiful day without starting his marriage drowning in debt. I walked over to my home office, opened my desk drawer, and pulled out my personal checkbook. I wrote out the amount, $50,000 exactly, signed my name, and walked back to the kitchen. I slid the folded piece of paper across the granite counter toward Bianca. She looked at it, confused for a second, before opening it. I watched her eyes widen, darting from the numbers to my face, her jaw practically unhinging. "Genevieve, what is this?" she stammered, her voice breathless. "It is the wedding," I said softly, keeping my tone entirely neutral. "The venue, the catering, the luxury hotel block for the out-of-town guests. It is all covered. Tell Julian and Daphne they can have the exact wedding they originally wanted." Bianca stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. How did you get this kind of money from your event planning job?" "I save aggressively," I lied smoothly. "But Bianca, listen to me very carefully. This comes with one strict, non-negotiable condition." She nodded frantically, clutching the check to her chest like a life preserver. "Anything." "Oh my God, Genevieve, anything." "This is an anonymous gift," I told her, looking directly into her eyes to ensure she understood the gravity of my request. "Julian has a lot of pride. If he knows I paid for his entire wedding, he will feel emasculated and indebted to me forever. I do not want him walking down the aisle thinking about a debt he owes his sister-in-law. You will tell them that you found a corporate sponsor, or an anonymous family friend, or a massive sweepstakes win." I do not care what story you invent. But my name stays completely out of it. Do you understand? Tears actually welled up in Bianca's eyes. For a brief, naive second, I thought I was witnessing a genuine breakthrough in our relationship. She lunged forward and hugged me tight. "You are an angel," she whispered into my shoulder. "I swear on my life, no one will ever know it was you." Thank you. Thank you so much. I went to sleep that night feeling a profound sense of peace. I had done a purely good thing, requiring zero recognition, expecting zero gratitude. I had secured my brother-in-law's happiness. I had absolutely no idea that my desire to give without taking credit was about to be weaponized, twisted, and used to orchestrate the most calculated, humiliating betrayal of my entire life. Fast forward to a crisp Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the check cleared. I was sitting in my corner office on the 32nd floor of downtown Phoenix. The city was sprawling below my floor-to-ceiling windows, buzzing with morning traffic. I had a spread of quarterly acquisition reports on my mahogany desk, planning a hostile takeover of a boutique resort chain in Nevada. I was in my element. Focused, sharp, and entirely detached from family drama. My assistant buzzed the intercom. "Ms. Genevieve, I have Naomi from Desert Rose Wedding Planning holding on line 1. She says it is a critical emergency regarding the Julian and Daphne wedding." I frowned, pressing the blinking button. I had intentionally stayed out of the planning process to maintain my cover, but Naomi's agency was one of my subsidiaries. I assumed she just needed approval on some minor budget override. "Naomi, this is Genevieve. What is the issue?" "Ma'am, thank goodness," Naomi said, her voice tight with the kind of strained professionalism planners only use when a family is actively imploding. "I apologize for calling you directly, but I am facing an unprecedented ethical and contractual dilemma, and I need guidance." "Take a breath, Naomi. Tell me exactly what happened." "I received a call yesterday afternoon from your husband, Harrison," Naomi began, hesitating slightly. "He issued some extremely specific, and quite frankly, bizarre modifications to the final guest list and the financial directives." I leaned back in my leather executive chair, spinning a gold pen between my fingers. "What kind of modifications?" Naomi swallowed audibly through the phone. "He officially revoked your invitation to the wedding. He instructed my team to completely erase your name from all seating charts, the reception entrance lists, and the family photography schedules. He said that moving forward, all communication regarding the event should go exclusively through his sister, Bianca." The pen stopped spinning. The ambient hum of the city 32 floors below seemed to completely drop away, leaving a ringing silence in my ears. "He revoked my invitation," I repeated, my voice devoid of any inflection. It was not a question. It was the sound of a mental file cabinet locking into place. "Yes, ma'am. But that is not the part that triggered the red flags for our legal compliance team." Naomi sounded genuinely distressed now. "Harrison was aggressively clear that while your physical presence was banned, the $50,000 funding you provided must remain fully allocated and untouched. He specifically said, and I quote, 'The money stays, the wife goes.'" I sat there, staring at a framed piece of original Southwestern artwork on my wall. My heart did not race. I did not cry. After 15 years of surviving in the cutthroat world of corporate hospitality acquisitions, my brain had a very specific protocol for dealing with threats. When faced with betrayal, I do not panic. I process. Harrison had systematically erased me from his brother's milestone celebration, all while wrapping his greedy fingers around my bank account. He was treating me not as a human being, not as a partner of a decade and a half, but as an ATM machine that he could unplug and shove into a closet once the cash was dispensed. "Naomi," I said, my tone carrying the quiet, deadly calm that usually made my competitors sweat through their expensive suits. "Did my husband indicate that this was a mutual decision? Did he claim I consented to this arrangement?" "Yes, exactly," Naomi replied quickly. "He told me that you were feeling highly overwhelmed and emotionally unstable lately, and that you had voluntarily agreed to step back from the wedding to prevent causing any uncomfortable family drama. But he stressed that you still wanted to pay for everything." The audacity was so magnificent it almost demanded applause. He had not only stolen my money and banned me from the family, but he had assassinated my character to the vendors, painting me as a hysterical, unstable woman who needed to be quarantined for the public good. "I see," I said softly. "Naomi, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Please do not take any action on Harrison's requests just yet. Maintain the status quo. I will be in touch shortly." I hung up the phone. I did not move for 5 full minutes. I just sat in the empire I had built, letting the absolute, breathtaking betrayal crystallize in my mind. Before I could even formulate my first move, my personal cell phone lit up on the desk. It was a text message from Harrison. I swiped the screen open. The message read, "Bianca told me you might get a call from the planners today about some list changes. Stop being dramatic. You are not coming to the wedding. It is better this way. We are keeping the funds since you offered them as a gift. Stay home and relax. We will discuss this when you have calmed down." I read the text 3 times. Every single word was a masterclass in manipulation. Stop being dramatic. Preemptively invalidating my justified rage. We are keeping the funds. The royal we, indicating he had discussed this theft with the rest of the family. When you have calmed down. Framing me as irrational and hysterical, while positioning himself as the patient, logical adult managing a toddler's tantrum. I did not reply. A cardinal rule of business warfare: never show your hand while the enemy is still talking. And right on cue, the enemy kept talking. My phone rang again. This time, it was my mother-in-law, Camilla. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello, Camilla. Genevieve, darling." Her voice flowed through the speaker with practiced, syrupy smoothness. "I just wanted to call and check on you. Harrison mentioned you two had a little chat about the wedding arrangements." "A text message is not a chat, Camilla. And I have just been informed that I am no longer welcome at an event I entirely paid for." "Oh, sweetheart, please do not use such harsh words like not welcome," Camilla cooed, deploying the gaslighting tactics she had honed over decades. "You know how chaotic these family events can get. Harrison was just explaining to us how stressed you have been with your little work projects lately. We all had a family meeting and agreed that the kindest thing to do is to take this burden off your shoulders." Taking the burden off my shoulders by banning me from the venue, but keeping my $50,000? I asked, keeping my voice terrifyingly flat. "Now, Genevieve, a gift is a gift," Camilla said, her tone taking on a slight edge of reprimand, like a teacher scolding a slow student. "You gave that money anonymously to bless Julian. If you start attaching demands to it, like forcing people to accommodate your presence when it might cause tension, well, that just makes the gift look like a manipulation, doesn't it?" My jaw tightened. They had weaponized my anonymity. Because I had asked for the donation to be a secret, they felt perfectly safe cutting me out. They assumed I would never have the guts to publicly expose myself as the funder and ruin Julian's day. They thought they had trapped me in my own generosity. Before I could respond, I heard Bianca's voice in the background, and then the phone shuffled. Bianca got on the line. "Genevieve, listen," Bianca said, sounding breathless and defensive. "We are just trying to protect the vibe of the day. You and Harrison have been tense lately, and Daphne is highly sensitive to negative energy. We just want Julian and Daphne to be surrounded by pure, uncomplicated family support. You understand, right? You are a professional, you know how event dynamics work. Protect the vibe. I was paying for the food they would eat, the chairs they would sit on, and the beds they would sleep in, but my negative energy was too much of a liability for their aesthetic." "I understand perfectly, Bianca," I said quietly. "I understand exactly how family dynamics work now." I ended the call. They thought I was sitting in my office crying, overwhelmed by their coordinated psychological attack. They thought they had successfully boxed me into a corner where my only option was to submit quietly and let them enjoy my money. They were so wrong. There was only one piece of the puzzle left to verify. I needed to know if the rot had infected the entire tree, or just the branches. I needed to know if Julian, the golden boy, the architect whose dreams I had just financed, was aware of this treason. I dialed Julian's direct line. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "Hey, Genevieve. I figured you would be calling." "Julian," I said, stripping away all pleasantries. "Did you know your brother revoked my invitation to your wedding?" A long, heavy silence stretched across the line. The silence of a coward caught in the headlights. "Look, Genevieve." Julian sighed, the sound of a man trying to talk his way out of a burning building. "It is a really complicated situation. Harrison came to me and Daphne yesterday. He said things between you two were practically at a breaking point, and that if you came, there would probably be a massive scene." "And you believed him?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You believed that I, a woman who has spent 15 years quietly supporting this family, would suddenly throw a tantrum at your wedding?" "It is not about what I believe," Julian deflected, retreating into corporate speak. "It is about minimizing risk. Daphne is already incredibly stressed. We just want a peaceful day. Harrison assured us that you were okay with stepping back to maintain the family harmony." "Julian, I paid for your entire wedding. Every single flower, every appetizer, every night in the honeymoon suite. Do you truly believe it is ethical to keep my $50,000 while explicitly banning me from the celebration it bought?" I waited for his moral compass to kick in. I waited for the man I had treated like a younger brother for a decade and a half to stand up, to say this was wrong, to tell Harrison to back off. Instead, Julian let out an uncomfortable, nervous laugh. "Genevieve, come on. Bianca told us you gave that money as an anonymous blessing. We are incredibly grateful, we really are. But, well, gifts do not come with strings attached, right? You cannot just buy your way into an event if the family decides your presence is a disruption." The final nail in the coffin. The man whose architectural career was built on the concept of structural integrity could not recognize the ethical foundation supporting his own wedding. He had willingly transformed my anonymous generosity into an obligation-free windfall, absolving himself of any responsibility to treat me with basic human decency. The entire family was complicit. Harrison was the mastermind, Camilla and Bianca were the enforcers, and Julian and Daphne were the willing, greedy beneficiaries who looked the other way while my pockets were picked. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "Gifts do not come with strings attached. Have a wonderful day." I hung up the phone. I did not shed a single tear. The sadness and the 15 years of trying to be accepted evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. They had calculated everything perfectly, except for one massive, catastrophic blind spot. Harrison and his family viewed me as a glorified party planner. They thought my influence ended at picking out napkin colors and organizing catering schedules. They had absolutely no idea that Desert Rose wedding planning operated under the umbrella of Southwest Event Solutions, which I had acquired 3 years ago. They had no idea that Sunset Ridge, the luxury venue they had booked, was owned by my hospitality division. They had no idea that the catering company and the luxury hotel block they were relying on were all subsidiaries that answered directly to my corporate board. They had just banned the sole owner of their entire wedding infrastructure. If you are enjoying this story of a family learning the hard way that you never bite the hand that literally owns the restaurant, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and drop the name of the city you are watching from in the comments below. Every single comment helps this video reach more people who need a reminder of their own worth. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the fallout. I stood up from my leather executive chair and walked over to the heavy oak double doors of my office. I locked them. The heavy click echoed in the silent, expansive room. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sprawling metropolis of Phoenix. Down there, millions of people were going about their day, completely unaware of the intricate, invisible webs of ownership and corporate power that dictated where they ate, where they slept, and where they celebrated their milestones. My husband's family was down there somewhere, too. They were probably congratulating themselves right now. They probably thought they had pulled off the perfect heist. They got their dream wedding, they secured the funding, and they successfully excised the blue-collar, party-planning wife from their aesthetic family portraits. I walked back to my desk and woke up my primary monitor. I did not need to search for the vendor list for Julian and Daphne's wedding. I had memorized it the night Bianca first showed me her pathetic, budget deficit notepad. First on the list, Desert Rose Wedding Planning, the agency Naomi worked for. I opened my secure corporate directory and clicked through the subsidiary folders. Desert Rose operated under a parent umbrella called Southwest Event Solutions. 3 years ago, Southwest Event Solutions had filed for bankruptcy after terrible mismanagement by its founders. I swooped in, bought the debt for pennies on the dollar, restructured the entire agency, and kept the original branding because it had a good local reputation. I was the sole managing director of the holding company that owned it. Second on the list, Sunset Ridge Estate. This was the venue Julian and Daphne had wept over. It featured breathtaking panoramic views of the desert mountains, perfect for architectural photography. They had booked it 14 months in advance. I pulled up the real estate portfolio of my primary hospitality group. Sunset Ridge was listed right there on page 4. It was one of 12 luxury properties I had acquired in a massive real estate sweep 5 years ago. I did not just own the business operating out of Sunset Ridge, I owned the dirt it was built on. Third, Copper Canyon Luxury Catering. This one made me smile a genuine, dark smile. Copper Canyon was my crown jewel. I had built it from the ground up to dominate the high-end corporate and wedding market in the region. They were the ones scheduled to serve the pan-seared scallops and the filet mignon that I had paid for. Finally, the Desert Palm Resort, where they had booked a block of 20 premium suites for their out-of-town guests. That hotel was the very first major commercial property I ever purchased. I knew the general manager there by his first name. I had personally chosen the thread count of the sheets Daphne's family would be sleeping on. Every single vendor, every service provider, every aspect of Julian's celebration connected directly to companies I controlled through strategic acquisitions. The family that had dismissed my business as a cute little catering hobby had unknowingly constructed their entire wedding celebration on the bedrock of my corporate empire. They had insulted, excluded, and stolen from the woman who literally owned every single component of their dream day. The poetic justice of it was almost too perfect to believe. It felt like the universe had hand-delivered me a loaded weapon and politely asked me to pull the trigger. I did not feel angry anymore. Anger is a hot, messy emotion that leads to mistakes. What I felt was a freezing, absolute clarity. For 15 years, I had built bridges to people who were quietly preparing to burn them the moment I became inconvenient rather than useful. They wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in their hierarchy. They were about to learn that when you try to put a CEO in her place, you had better make sure you do not accidentally lock her in the control room. I picked up my secure line and dialed Victor. Victor was my closest business partner, my lead corporate counsel, and the man who had helped me structure some of my most complex, ruthless acquisitions. We had shared trenches in boardrooms across the country. He was sharp, fiercely loyal, and possessed a moral compass that pointed strictly toward protecting our assets. Genevieve, Victor answered on the first ring, his voice crisp. Tell me we are finally closing the Nevada deal. The Nevada deal is pending, I said, my voice steady. I have a completely different situation that requires your immediate attention. It is personal, but it involves our regional subsidiaries. I spent the next 20 minutes laying out exactly what had happened. I told him about the dinner, the anonymous $50,000 check, the call from Naomi, the text from Harrison, and the conversations with Camilla and Julian. I gave him the facts devoid of emotion, presenting it like a hostile takeover attempt by a rival firm. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Victor finally spoke, his voice was laced with pure disgust. Genevieve, that is completely unacceptable behavior, he said. I do not care what their twisted family dynamics are. You do not take someone's money and then exclude them from the event. That is fraud. That is theft. Plain and simple. I am aware, I replied. What I need to know right now, Victor, is the exact status of our cancellation protocols across Southwest Event Solutions, Sunset Ridge, Copper Canyon, and Desert Palm. Specifically, I want to know my unilateral authority to void active contracts internally without standard notice. I could hear the sound of Victor furiously typing on his end. He knew exactly what I was planning, and the sheer corporate violence of it clearly thrilled him. "Let us see," Victor muttered, reading through the legal templates we had drafted years ago. As the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of the parent holding company, you retain absolute authority to terminate any service contract across all subsidiaries for any reason deemed, quote, detrimental to the ethical standards or operational integrity of the parent company. End quote. So, I do not need to cite force majeure or vendor conflicts? Absolutely not, Victor confirmed, a predatory edge creeping into his tone. You own the board. You own the assets. If you want to pull the plug, you just pull the plug. The legal fallout, if any, would just be returning their original deposits, which you paid for anyway. Harrison authorized the planner to keep the funds under false pretenses. Legally, we can freeze that $50,000 pending a fraud review. Good, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk. I want you to draft the internal directives. We are pulling the plug on the Julian and Daphne event. Every single one of them. All at once? Victor asked. All at once, I confirmed. I want them to feel the ground completely drop out from under them. Consider it done, Victor said. I will have the termination notices routed to the respective general managers and agency directors within the hour. Do you want to notify the wedding planner yourself? Yes, I said softly, looking out at the city skyline. I believe I owe Naomi a call back. I waited until precisely 10 o'clock the next morning to make the call. I wanted Harrison and his family to have one final, peaceful night of sleep, secure in their delusion that they had won. I picked up the phone and dialed Naomi's direct line at Desert Rose Wedding Planning. She answered immediately, sounding just as stressed as she had the day before. Genevieve, thank you for calling back, Naomi said, exhaling heavily. I have been holding off on processing any of Harrison's modifications, but the venue needs final headcounts by tomorrow, and I really need to know how you want to handle this ethical nightmare. Naomi, I began, my voice carrying the polished, undeniable authority I used when firing executives. I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not going to process Harrison's modifications. You are not going to finalize the headcounts. In fact, you are going to cease all communication with my husband and his family immediately. Naomi stammered, clearly confused. I understand you are upset, Genevieve, but we do have a signed contract with Julian and Daphne for the planning services. If I just stop talking to them, my agency could be held liable for breach of contract, and our parent company is extremely strict about. Your parent company is Southwest Event Solutions, I interrupted smoothly, which was acquired 3 years ago by Morrison Hospitality Group. I am the Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Morrison Hospitality Group. I am your ultimate employer, Naomi. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched for so long that I could hear Naomi's ragged breathing through the speaker. I could vividly imagine the color draining from her face as she mentally traced the corporate hierarchy, suddenly realizing that the quiet, dismissed wife she had been talking to was actually the apex predator of her entire industry. Ma'am. I had absolutely no idea, Naomi finally whispered, her professional composure completely shattering. The corporate structure is so complex, and your husband never mentioned. My husband has no involvement in my business operations, I corrected her sharply. He also possesses zero authority to modify contracts or allocate funds within my companies. When he instructed you to ban me while keeping my money, he was attempting to commit financial fraud using my own subsidiaries against me. Oh my God, Naomi gasped. Ma'am, if I had known about the ownership structure, I would never have even entertained his phone call. I am so deeply sorry. Our standard procedures. I do not blame you, Naomi. You were doing your job based on the information you had, I said, offering a small sliver of mercy. But now you have the correct information. Here is your official directive from the parent company. The event is cancelled. You are to immediately terminate the planning contract for the Julian and Daphne wedding. Furthermore, you will receive internal memos from corporate legal within the hour confirming that Sunset Ridge, Copper Canyon Catering, and the Desert Palm Resort are also terminating their contracts with this client. All services are voided. Naomi was audibly shaking now. Ma'am, are you completely certain? The wedding is just weeks away. If we drop them now, finding replacement services in Phoenix will be virtually impossible on such short notice. The industry is completely booked. I am entirely certain, I replied, my voice as cold as ice. My family made a calculated business decision to exclude me while retaining my funding. Now they will learn what happens when you betray the person who controls the infrastructure your dreams depend upon. Terminate the contracts, Naomi. Do it now. Yes, Miss Genevieve. Immediately. I hung up the phone, folded my hands on my desk, and took a deep, satisfying breath. The dominoes had been pushed. There was no stopping the collapse now. The cascade of consequences unfolded with a speed and brutality that even I had not fully anticipated. I spent the next 6 hours in my office, approving acquisition documents for the Nevada deal, while my executive assistant provided me with discreet, real-time updates on the devastation occurring across town. At exactly 11 in the morning, Naomi sent the formal termination emails to Julian and Daphne. At 11:15, the general manager of Sunset Ridge Estate called Julian to inform him that their venue booking was invalid due to unforeseen corporate directives. By noon, Copper Canyon Catering and Desert Palm Resort had both issued matching cancellation notices. It was a perfectly synchronized, corporate carpet bombing. My personal phone started ringing at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was Bianca. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. She called again. And again. On the 4th try, I finally picked up, injecting just the right amount of mild, distracted curiosity into my voice. Hello, Bianca. I am quite busy at the office. What is it? Genevieve, something terrible is happening. Bianca shrieked into the phone. Her voice was an octave higher than usual, completely breathless with panic. The fake, syrupy sweetness from yesterday was completely gone, replaced by the raw terror of a woman watching a train derail in slow motion. Calm down, I said lightly. What is going on? Every single vendor just called to cancel their services, she sobbed. The planner, the venue, the caterer, the hotel reservations. Everything is gone, Genevieve. They all sent these scary legal emails claiming it is due to sudden parent company policy changes. None of it makes any sense. We signed contracts. We confirmed everything. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a glass of sparkling water. The irony was so delicious it almost had a flavor. She was desperately crying for help to the exact woman they had conspired to exclude just 24 hours ago. That sounds extremely concerning, Bianca, I said, using the sympathetic tone I always employed during family crises. Have you tried demanding an explanation? Or perhaps contacting alternative vendors? That is the impossible part, she wailed, her voice cracking. I have been calling for 2 hours straight. Every single decent venue in the Phoenix area is suddenly booked solid. Every quality caterer claims they have no availability. Every hotel shows no vacancy for our block of dates. It is like the entire industry coordinated to shut us out. Her assessment was remarkably accurate. The industry had indeed coordinated to shut them out, although she remained blissfully oblivious to the identity of the coordinator. My 15 years of strategic acquisitions had created a network so comprehensive that finding alternatives required looking far below the luxury standards Julian and Daphne demanded. Well, it is wedding season, I offered mildly. Perhaps Julian and Daphne will just have to do that backyard barbecue you were all discussing last month. With paper plates. The line went dead quiet for a second as Bianca processed my lack of panic. Genevieve, you do not understand. Julian is having a panic attack. Daphne is locked in her bedroom throwing up. We have 60 out-of-town guests who suddenly have no place to sleep. Please, you work in this industry. You have to know someone. You have to help us fix this. I am sorry, Bianca, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. But as Camilla reminded me yesterday, I am just a woman with a little party planning hobby. And more importantly, Harrison explicitly told me that my involvement in this wedding was a disruption to your family harmony. I am just respecting his wishes by staying entirely out of it. I hung up the phone and turned it completely off. I did not need to hear from Julian or Camilla or Daphne. I was waiting for the main event. I was waiting for Harrison. I left the office precisely at 6 in the evening. I drove my Range Rover through the Phoenix traffic with the windows down, listening to classical music, feeling lighter than I had in a decade and a half. When I pulled into the driveway of our custom-built, 5-bedroom home, I saw Harrison's sedan parked haphazardly on the lawn. He had clearly rushed home in a blind panic. I unlocked the front door and walked into the kitchen. Harrison was pacing back and forth across the marble floor, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. His phone was clutched in his hand like a grenade. When he saw me, his head snapped up, his face flushed dark red with a mixture of rage and terror. "Where the hell have you been?" he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Your phone is off. Do you have any idea the absolute chaos that is happening right now?" I calmly set my designer handbag on the kitchen island and walked over to the refrigerator to pour myself a glass of iced tea. "I was at work, Harrison. And yes, Bianca mentioned something about a few vendor cancellations. It sounds stressful." "A few cancellations?" he shouted, slamming his hand against the granite countertop. "The entire wedding is destroyed, Genevieve. Everything is gone. The venue, the food, the rooms. Julian is catatonic. Daphne's family is threatening to sue us. And the worst part is, the vendors are refusing to refund the $50,000 deposit, claiming the funds are frozen pending a corporate fraud review." He marched toward me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me, a tactic that had worked when I was 27, but was utterly useless now. "You did this," he accused, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I do not know who you slept with or what minor manager you begged for a favor, but you called your little catering contacts and told them to sabotage my brother's wedding out of spite. Because your fragile feelings got hurt." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 15 years. I looked at the profound, pathetic ignorance shining in his eyes. "Harrison," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an anvil. "I did not beg anyone for a favor. I did not call any minor managers." "Then how did you do it?" he demanded. "I did it," I said, setting the glass down with a sharp clink, "because Southwest Event Solutions, the agency you tried to manipulate, is a subsidiary of my holding company. I did it because Sunset Ridge Estate is a property listed on my corporate asset ledger. I did it because Copper Canyon Catering and Desert Palm Resort report directly to my board of directors." Harrison froze. The anger in his face instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending blankness. It was the look of a man trying to read a language he did not speak. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice dropping an octave. "I am talking about the fact that I own the parent company, Harrison. I am the chief executive officer of the entire regional hospitality network you booked. I do not just plan parties. I own the infrastructure. I own the dirt. I own the contracts you tried to modify." I took a step toward him, closing the distance, forcing him to look me in the eyes. "You thought you could steal $50,000 from me," I continued, my voice deadly and precise. "You thought you could ban me from a celebration I completely funded and paint me as an emotionally unstable liability to vendors who ultimately collect their paychecks from my corporate accounts. You thought you were dealing with a quiet, submissive wife. But you were actually dealing with the apex predator of the entire Southwestern event industry. And you just willingly walked directly into my teeth." Harrison physically stumbled backward, bumping into the stainless steel refrigerator. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The reality of his colossal miscalculation was crashing down on him in real time. The power dynamic of our 15-year marriage inverted in a matter of seconds. "Genevieve," he finally croaked, the arrogant bravado entirely stripped away, leaving only a small, terrified man. I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know." "I know you didn't," I said, picking up my handbag. "Because for 15 years, your ego was too fragile to ask. Now, if you will excuse me, I am going to a luxury hotel, one that I own, for the next 2 days. I suggest you use that time to explain to your family exactly why they no longer have a wedding." I turned and walked out the front door, leaving Harrison standing alone in a kitchen he could never afford to buy, fully realizing that his life, as he knew it, was officially over. I did not speak to Harrison or anyone from his family for 48 hours. I stayed in the penthouse suite of one of my downtown properties, enjoying room service and uninterrupted sleep. I ignored the hundreds of frantic voicemails and text messages that flooded my phone. Let them sit in the dark. Let them panic. Silence is often the most terrifying weapon in negotiations. On Friday morning, I had my assistant send a formal, corporate calendar invite to Harrison, Julian, Daphne, Camilla, and Bianca. The location was listed simply as the main boardroom of Morrison Hospitality Group headquarters, 32nd floor. At precisely 2 in the afternoon, the heavy glass doors of my boardroom opened. I sat at the head of a massive, custom-built mahogany table. Behind me, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the sprawling city. The walls were lined with industry awards, framed acquisition articles from Forbes, and original artwork. It was an environment designed entirely to intimidate, to project absolute, unyielding power. They filed into the room like prisoners walking toward the gallows. Harrison looked as though he had aged 5 years in 2 days. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Camilla and Bianca, normally so loud and opinionated, were completely silent, their eyes darting around the luxurious room, finally comprehending the sheer magnitude of the wealth and influence they had been casually insulting for a decade and a half. Julian and Daphne looked exhausted, carrying the specific despair of a couple who had watched their dream evaporate into thin air. "Sit down," I commanded. I did not offer them water. I did not offer pleasantries. They sat, clustering together at the far end of the table. "I am not going to waste my time or yours with a long lecture," I began, folding my hands on the polished wood. "You all know exactly what you did. You took my anonymous generosity, a gift meant to bless Julian, and you weaponized it. You conspired to steal my money while explicitly banning me from the celebration to protect your family harmony. You treated me like an ATM. You treated me like garbage." Camilla opened her mouth, her face trembling, perhaps attempting to deploy one last, desperate gaslighting maneuver. "Genevieve, please, we were just..." "If you speak again, Camilla, I will have security escort you out of the building, and this conversation is over permanently," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Camilla snapped her mouth shut, tears spilling down her cheeks. I turned my attention to Julian. "Julian, I gave you that $50,000 because I cared about you. Your silence when Harrison orchestrated my exclusion was the ultimate betrayal. However, unlike your brother, I believe you actually possess a conscience buried somewhere under your family's toxic influence." Julian looked up at me. To his credit, he did not look away, and he did not make excuses. "Genevieve," he said, his voice raw and thick with genuine remorse. "I am so sorry. I was a coward. I let them convince me that your presence would cause a scene, and I was greedy enough to want the money without dealing with the conflict. What I did was inexcusable. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I am deeply ashamed." It was the first piece of honest accountability anyone in this family had shown in 15 years. It was enough for me to offer my terms. "Your apology is noted, Julian," I said. "Because I do not wish to see you start your marriage with nothing, I am prepared to reinstate a significantly modified version of your wedding contracts. But it will happen under my strict, non-negotiable conditions." I slid a printed document across the long table. Julian caught it. "Condition 1, I stated. The guest list is slashed. No extended relatives, no plus ones you barely know. Immediate family and close friends only. 40 people maximum. Condition 2, I continued, staring directly at Harrison, who was shrinking into his leather chair. You will not use my $50,000. The new, scaled-down wedding will cost exactly $75,000. And Harrison, you are going to liquidate your personal stock portfolio to pay that amount in full to my corporate accounts by Monday morning." Harrison gasped, his face turning pale. "Genevieve, 75,000? That is my entire savings. That is everything I have. You tried to steal 50,000 from me, I reminded him coldly. Consider the extra 25,000 an asshole tax. Pay it, or your brother gets married in a courthouse. And condition 3, I finished, looking at Daphne and Julian. During the reception dinner, you both will stand up, take the microphone, and publicly explain exactly why the wedding was almost cancelled. You will acknowledge your betrayal, you will acknowledge my ownership of the companies, and you will apologize to me in front of every single guest. The room was dead silent. The terms were brutal. It was financial and social humiliation, perfectly tailored to match the crime they had committed. Julian looked at the paper, then looked at Daphne. Daphne, her eyes wide with shock, slowly nodded. They had no other choice. They had no leverage. We accept, Julian said quietly. We will do whatever you ask, Genevieve. I stood up from my chair, adjusting my suit jacket. Good. The contracts will be restored once Harrison's wire transfer clears. Now, get out of my office. The wedding took place exactly 3 weeks later. It was held at Sunset Ridge, as originally planned, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different. Stripped of the gaudy excess, with only 40 genuine friends and family present, it felt surprisingly elegant. It felt real. I attended wearing a stunning emerald green designer gown, looking every bit the corporate titan I was. I sat at the front. Harrison sat beside me, utterly defeated, looking like a man attending his own funeral. His family kept a wide, terrified distance from me all evening. When it was time for dinner, Julian and Daphne kept their word. Julian stood at the front of the room, holding the microphone. His voice shook slightly, but he did not waver. He told the absolute truth. He confessed to the entire room how they had secretly banned me while keeping my money, and how my ultimate power and subsequent grace had saved them from total ruin. Daphne wept as she publicly apologized for her complicity. The silence from the guests was deafening. The public vindication I received in that moment was profound. I did not need to shout to establish my power. I had simply forced them to broadcast their own shame. The very next morning, the Arizona sun was barely cresting the horizon when I dragged my final suitcase down the stairs of our house. I had spent the weekend quietly packing my essentials. Clothes, personal documents, and the few sentimental items that actually mattered to me. The luxury furniture, the expensive art, the custom kitchen, I was leaving it all behind. It was just stuff. I could buy it all again tomorrow if I wanted to. Harrison was standing in the kitchen, looking haggard and desperate. He had watched me pack the car, finally realizing that the public humiliation at the wedding was not the end of his punishment. It was just the closure of that specific chapter. Genevieve, please, he begged, stepping into the hallway, his voice cracking. I paid the money. Julian apologized. We did everything you asked. You cannot just throw away 15 years of marriage over a mistake. I paused at the front door, my hand resting on the brushed steel handle. I looked back at him one last time. It was not a mistake, Harrison, I said softly, feeling completely detached from the man standing in front of me. A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. Orchestrating the systemic exclusion and financial exploitation of your wife is a calculated revelation of your character. You showed me exactly who you are, and you showed me exactly how little you value me. I can change, he pleaded, tears finally pooling in his eyes. We can go to counseling. Please, Genevieve. I need you. He did not need me. He needed my money. He needed the lifestyle I provided. He needed the quiet, accommodating woman who made him feel bigger than he actually was. You do not need me, Harrison, I told him. And more importantly, I do not need you. My attorney will contact you on Monday regarding the divorce settlement. I suggest you retain decent counsel. I opened the door, walked out to my Range Rover, and drove away. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. 3 months have passed since that morning. Morrison Hospitality Group recently relocated to a massive, state-of-the-art headquarters in Scottsdale. The wedding drama, surprisingly, became a legend in the regional hospitality industry. Competitors who had previously underestimated me now approach my corporate board with intense, careful respect. My market share has increased by 12%. Julian and Daphne send me occasional, respectful messages. They are actively trying to be better people, and I suspect the brutal lesson they learned saved their marriage before it even began. Harrison, meanwhile, is living in a rented apartment, fighting a losing battle against my fleet of divorce attorneys, slowly realizing that without my invisible support, his life is entirely unremarkable. I am living alone in a beautiful penthouse overlooking the desert mountains. For the first time in 15 years, my home, my business, and my life reflect my actual standards, rather than the compromises I accepted to keep a toxic family comfortable. I learned the hard way that quiet strength is beautiful, but sometimes you have to let people hear the lion roar so they remember not to put their hands in the cage. So, Reddit Brain Trust, looking back at the ashes of my 15-year marriage and the ruins of their perfectly planned exclusion. Am I the jerk for hitting the nuclear button and making them pay $75,000 to buy back their own dignity? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you believe that quiet strength deserves recognition and that nobody should be treated as just an ATM, hit that subscribe button. It's free and helps us share more incredible true stories of finding your voice when others underestimate your worth.